Inflation and 3 Business Cycle Chapter 3.1. Inflation. Inflation refers to a sustained/continuous rise in the general price level of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. The important thing that we must understand is that inflation is a rise in the prices of a basket of goods and services. If the price of only one good or few goods alone has gone up, it does not constitute inflation. Thus, inflation measures how much more expensive a set of goods and services have become over a certain period, usually a year. For example, suppose with 50 rupees we could have bought 1 liter milk in January 2022, but in January 2023 we need 55 rupees to buy the same quantity of milk. So, the price of milk has inflated by 10% in a year. However, it does not mean that the entire economy has seen the same level of inflation. 3.2. Types of inflation. Different types of inflation can be identified on the basis of degree or speed with which the prices rise. The distinction may also be based on the processes through which inflation is induced. It is also possible to classify inflation on the basis of time. Sometimes inflation is sporadic, at other times it is comprehensive. 3.2.1. Based on rate/speed of price rise. On the basis of prices, inflation may be divided into 4 types. 1. Creeping inflation. 2. Walking inflation. 3. Running inflation. And 4. Jumping or galloping or hyperinflation. Creeping inflation is a condition when prices are gently rising. The inflation rate is usually under or up to 3%. It is the mildest form of inflation and also known as mild inflation or low inflation. Walking inflation is a condition when prices are rising by more than 3%, but less than 10% per annum. It is a danger signal of the occurrence of running and jumping inflation under which the rise in prices takes place at a faster rate. Running inflation is when prices start to rise at a significant rate, i.e. between 10% to 20% a year. Under galloping inflation, prices rise every moment and inflation rises up to 20% or more. Hyperinflation is a situation when price rise is out of control. It is an indication of the highest degree of abnormality in the monetary system of a country. Under the conditions of such an inflation, all assets having a fixed value lose their real value. For example, in Real GDP Price Level D1 SBA D0 Figure 3.2, an illustration of inflation when demand increases from D0 to D1. 2018, Venezuela, as per IMF, prices rose by 13,000%. 3.2.2, based on the underlying reason of inflation. At market equilibrium, the quantity supplied, Q, is equal to the quantity demanded, Q. When there is any mismatch between demand or supply, the price is also affected. Based on this, we have 2 types of inflation, demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. XM. As we have seen in the national income chapter, the total demand aggregate in the economy is demand pull inflation occurs when the demand for goods and services increases faster than an economy's productive capacity. In the short run, as businesses. Remember, C plus I plus G plus XM is the same as GDP, and an increase in these parameters causes economic growth. So, it is clear that growth cannot happen without a minimum level of inflation. Cannot significantly increase production, and supply will remain constant. In this case, the equilibrium moves from point A to point B, and prices will tend to rise, resulting in inflation. Demand pull inflation is a result of increased spending power of consumers in an economy. Inflation is not always bad. We need the right amount of inflation to be allowed, which is fixed at 4 plus or minus 2% by the monetary policy framework of RBI for sustained economic growth. Cost push inflation occurs when prices of production processes or inputs increase, wages, rent, interest, cost of doing business, logistics, etc. For example, when the minimum wages increase or the interest rate for loans increases, the price automatically rises. Cost push inflation occurs due to reduced ability of producers to produce goods at a certain price. Real GDP Price Level DYZS1 S0 Figure 3.4 shows that higher production costs may decrease the aggregate supply S0 to S1, and this leads to rise in the overall price level because the equilibrium point moved from point Z to point Y. 3.3. Impact of inflation on various economic players. Value of money decreases with inflation. Certain level of inflation is always desirable in an economy. Inflation acts as an incentive for producers to produce more and keeps businesses profitable. It also prevents consumers from waiting for lower prices before making purchases, thus boosting consumption. However, high level of inflation disrupts the economy, erodes the value of money, and paves the way for social and economic upheavals, besides being highly demoralizing. Those who lose due to inflation. 1. Creditors/lenders. The real value of money obtained back from lending may be eroded due to inflation. So, if the rate of interest is unable to beat the inflation rate, the lender may end up making a loss. For better understanding, let's say X lent Y 100 rupees at 7% interest in 2021. But next year, 2022, when Y pays back 107 rupees, the year had almost 10% inflation. Effectively, X suffered a loss of 3 rupees. 2. Bondholders. Bondholders suffer as inflation erodes onto the interest earning. That's why we have inflation-indexed bonds. 3. The general public. It erodes the purchasing power of the general public. Inflation can also lead to a fall in the value of their savings. 4. Industries. Demand pull inflation, to an extent, is good for industries as their sale increases and profit increases. On the other hand, cost push inflation decreases the buying capacity of consumers and ultimately lowers the profits of industries. 5. Investments and employment. Inflation decreases the buying capacity and causes an economic slowdown, impacting investments adversely. A slowdown may also increase unemployment. 6. Taxpayers. Bracket creep is a condition which occurs when inflation pushes taxpayers into higher income tax brackets. This results in an increase in income taxes without an increase in real income of the taxpayer. 7. Overall economy. Uncertainty over future inflation can discourage investment and savings. Also, if inflation is rapid enough, it can cause shortages of goods as consumers begin hoarding, expecting that prices will increase in the future. It may affect the cost of living and may worsen poverty. Those who benefit out of inflation. 1. Borrowers. They benefit out of inflation as the effective real money paid in the subsequent year is less than what she borrowed. 2. Exchange rate. With the increase in inflation, the currency of the economy depreciates, which decreases the real cost of products, making exports more competitive. However, imports become costlier. Inflation premium. It is the bonus brought by inflation to the borrowers. Borrowers now have to return a lesser value of the currency as inflation has eroded the value of the currency. 3.4. Measures of inflation. Economists measure the price levels with a price index. A price index is a number based on a basket of goods and services, and its movement reflects the movement in the average level of prices. If a price index rises 5%, it means the average level of prices has risen by 5%. In other words, the price index is an indicator of the average price movement over a period of time of a fixed basket of goods and services. The constitution of the basket of goods services is done keeping into consideration whether changes are to be measured in retail, wholesale, or producer price. The basket will also vary for economy-wide, regional, or sector-specific series. 3.4.1 Consumer Price Index (CPI). Consumer Price Index measures the average change in retail prices of goods and services. It is released by the National Statistical Office (NSO). Note: CSO and NSSO got merged into NSO. Various categories and subcategories have been made for classifying consumption items and on the basis of consumer categories like urban or rural. Based on these indices and subindices obtained, the final overall index of price is calculated. It gives an idea of the cost of living. Types of CPI: 1. CPI for industrial workers, IW. 2. CPI for agricultural labor, AL. 3. CPI for rural labor, RL. 4. CPI rural/urban/combined. The CSO, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, MSBI, in 2015 revised the base year of CPI from 2010 to 2012. The RBI started using CPI combined as the sole inflation measure for the purpose of targeting inflation. CPI's base year compiled by CPI, IW 2016 Ministry of Labor and Employment CPIL 1986 to 87. Ministry of Labor and Employment CPIRL 1986 to 87. Ministry of Labor and Employment CPI rural/urban/combined 2012 Central Statistical Office, CSO. Food and beverages, fuel and light miscellaneous contribution, %, housing weights, clothing and foot. Revised series of CPI, weight computed on the basis of Consumer Expenditure Survey, CES, 2011 to 2012. Group description revised series of CPI rural-urban combined food and beverages, 54.1, 830, 6.29, 45.86. Pan tobacco and intoxicant 3.26, 1.36, 2.38 clothing and footwear 7.36, 5.57, 6.5, 3 housing, 21.67, 10.07 fuel and light 7.94, 5.58, 6.84 miscellaneous 27.26, 29.5, 3, 28.32 total 100.00, 100.00, 100.00. 3.4.2 Wholesale Price Index, WPI. It measures the changes in the prices of goods sold and traded in bulk by wholesale businesses to other businesses. It is published by Office of Economic Advisor, OEA, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. The weights of the 3 major group of items in WPI are shown below. Major group weight primary articles, e.g. food articles, vegetables, milk, minerals, etc. 22.62 fuel and power, e.g. LPG, petrol, etc. 13.15 manufactured products, highest weightage, e.g. manufacture of food products, sugar, manufacture of textiles, etc. 64.23 all commodities, 100.00. It provides for the level of inflation at the wholesale transactions level for the economy. This helps in timely intervention by the government to check inflation, in particular, inflation in essential commodities, before the price increase spills over to retail prices. WPI is also used for indexation, adjustment to inflation levels, by users in business contracts, so that both parties do not lose out due to inflation. Global investors also track WPI as one of the key macro indicators for their investment decisions. Manufactured product source, Office of Economic Advisor, DPIT note. Asterisk April, December fuel and power primary articles contribution, %, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. 3.4.2 New Wholesale Price Index, WPI. Taxes in the base year for WPI was changed from 2004 to 2005 to 2011 to 12 in May 2017. The number of items in the basket has been increased from 676 to 697. The new Wholesale Price Index does not include order to remove the impact of fiscal policy. This also brings the new WPI series closer to the Producer Price Index and is in consonance with the global practices. The item level indices are being compiled based on the geometric mean as compared to the arithmetic mean used in the WPI 2004 to 2005 series. As a part of the revised WPI series, a separate WPI Food Index has been launched. WPI Food Index, along with CPI Food Price Index, would help monitor the food inflation effectively in India. WPI is a purely commodity index and does not include services. On the other hand, CPI includes both goods and services. Further, WPI measures inflation at the first stage of transaction while CPI measures inflation at the final stage of transaction. 3.4.3 GDP deflator. It is a ratio of the value of goods and services an economy produces in a particular year at current prices to that of prices that prevailed during the base year. If the GDP deflator is found to be 2, it implies a rise in price, inflation, level by a factor of 2 in the current year compared to the base year. The GDP deflator is acclaimed as a better measure of price behavior because it covers all goods and services produced in the country. GDP deflator equals nominal GDP/real GDP. 3.4.3.1 Difference between WPI, CPI, and GDP deflator. WPI, CPI, GDP deflator measures inflation at the retail, at the level wholesale level of overall level. Economy covers measures only goods, both goods and services which are consumed by the customers in the representative basket. Overall goods and services produced in the economy. Weightage of NADA of food group specific group is 39.06% basket and 24.4% higher. Includes all products as proportional to GDP calculation. Includes all goods. Goods and only in the services domestically Indian consumed produced wholesale goods and market services released available every month only on a month. Quarterly basis when GDP figures are available published by CSO by Ministry Office of Statistics Economic Advisor, Ministry of Commerce. 3.4.4 Producer Price Index, PPI. PPI is it calculates the movement of price from the seller's point of view. It can be calculated either when the goods leave the place of production or as they enter the production process. It excludes any taxes, transport, and trade margin that the purchaser may have to pay. The Producer Price Index published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. 3.4.5 Index of Industrial Production, IIP. It shows the growth rates in different industry groups of the economy in a stipulated period of time. The IIP index is computed and published by the Central Statistical Organization, CSO, on a monthly basis. The Index of Industrial Production is available at the level of industrial sectors and subsectors. The main branches are mining, manufacturing, and electricity. The Index of Industrial Production is also available according to the use of the product, that is, primary goods, consumer durables, capital goods, intermediate goods, infrastructure/construction goods, and consumer non-durables. Weightage pattern of IIP, industrial production sectors, sector weight mining 14.4, manufacturing 77.6, electricity 8.0, general index 100.0. Weightage pattern of IIP, use-based groups, group weight primary 34.1, capital good 8.2, intermediate good 17.2, infrastructure/construction goods 12.3, consumer durables 12.8, consumer non-durables 15.3. General index 100. 150-130-11. The 8 core industries of India represent 40.23% of the weight of items that are included in the IIP. The combined index of 8 core industries, ICI, is compiled by Office of the Economic Advisor, Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, DPIT, Ministry of Commerce. The 8 core sectors/industries in the order of weightage are 1. Refinery products 2. Electricity 3. Steel 4. Coal 5. Crude oil 6. Natural gas 7. Cement 8. Fertilizers 3.4.6. Other indices. 3.4. 6.1 Service Price Index, SPI, Service Price Index. SPI, the index captures the movement of prices in various services like insurance, banking, transport, and communication. 3.4. 6.2. Residex. Residex. It is designed to track changes in housing prices at neighborhood, city, and national levels. It is an initiative of the National Housing Bank, NHB. It is calculated with 2007 as the base year. 3.4. 6.3. Cost Inflation Index, CII. The CII is notified every year under Income Tax Act, 1961 to match the prices to inflation rate based on the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, urban. CII equals 75% of the average rise in the Consumer Price Index, urban, for the immediately preceding year. Refinery products, fertilizers, cement, electricity source. Department for Promotion. It is used by a taxpayer to compute long-term capital gains, LTCG, arising out of the sale of capital assets after adjusting for inflation. 3.5. Miscellaneous concepts related to inflation. 3.5.1. Deflation, disinflation, reflation, and stagflation. Deflation is a decrease in the general price levels of goods and services. It is the opposite of inflation. During deflation, prices of goods and services tend to fall. It occurs when the inflation rate falls below 0%. Thus, inflation is negative during deflation. Deflation increases the purchasing power, value, of money. People can buy more from the same amount of money. People may have less propensity to spend and more to save as they defer purchases in expectation of a further decline in prices. Deflation is good for lenders and bad for borrowers. Deflation increases the real value of debt. Thus, deflation discourages borrowing and, by extension, consumption and investment, and along with a decline in consumption, also leads to an economic slowdown. The slowdown can cause high unemployment, increased layoff, fall in the wage rates, decreased profits, low demand, low income, restricted credit supply in the economy. Deflation often leads the economy to depression. Deflation can be checked by increasing the credit supply in the economy, thereby boosting the demand by expansionary policies. A similar sounding but quite different concept is disinflation. Disinflation is a slower rate of inflation. It is simply a slowing of inflation. For example, if the inflation rate for years 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023 are 10%, 8%, 6%, and 4% respectively, then it is a situation of disinflation in the economy as inflation is slowing down. The general price level rises in disinflation, but the rate of inflation decreases over the period. Unlike inflation and deflation, which refer to the direction of prices, disinflation refers to the rate of change in the rate of inflation. Disinflation is not considered as problematic because prices do not actually drop, and disinflation does not usually signal the onset of a slowing economy. Deflation, disinflation. Prices of goods and services fall. Prices of goods and services do not fall. Their price rise, but the overall rate is low. It is the result of a decline in the overall price level in the economy. It is overall fall in inflation rate. Inflation is negative, inflation is positive. However, the rate of inflation slows down, for example, from 3% to 2%. It signifies the direction of prices of goods and services. It signifies the rate of change in the rate of inflation. Harmful to the economy. Usually not harmful to the economy. Reflation is a fiscal or monetary policy enacted after a period of economic slowdown or contraction. Here, the goal is to expand output, stimulate spending, and curb the effects of deflation. As such, the term reflation is also used to describe the first phase of economic recovery after a period of contraction. Reflation policies can include reducing taxes, changing the money supply, and lowering interest rates. Stagflation is a situation where the inflation rate is high, and at the same time, the economic growth rate slows down and unemployment is also high. Stagflation equals high inflation plus high unemployment plus stagnant growth. It raises a dilemma for economic policy, since actions designed to lower inflation may exacerbate unemployment and vice versa. It is unusual because policies to reduce inflation make life difficult for the unemployed, while steps to alleviate unemployment raise inflation. This has to be addressed from the supply side of economics by boosting more production. 3.5.2. Open inflation and suppressed inflation. When the government and the monetary authorities of a country do not take any measure to control the spending of the people, there occurs a sharp rise in demand and prices, causing open inflation. In contrast, when government imposes fiscal and monetary controls to check open inflation, it is known as suppressed inflation. 3.5.3. Headline inflation and core inflation. Headline inflation refers to the change in value of all goods in the basket. It is the raw overall inflation figure on the basis of the Consumer Price Index, CPI. The headline inflation figure is not adjusted for seasonality or for the often volatile elements. In India, Consumer Price Index, combined, CPIC, represents headline inflation. Figure 3.9, declining core inflation but volatile food inflation. Core inflation refers to the change in value of goods and services, excluding those commodities that have extremely volatile price movements. For example, food items, energy products, etc. Core inflation equals headline inflation, inflation of volatile products such as food and fuel. Refined core inflation. Economic Survey 2022 talked about this inflation. It provided a clear view of the underlying inflation trends by excluding certain volatile components such as petrol for vehicle, diesel for vehicle, and lubricants and other fuels for vehicles. Additionally, broader categories like food and beverages and fuel and light are also excluded from the headline retail inflation. Refined core inflation equals core inflation, petrol for vehicle, diesel for vehicle, and lubricants and other fuels for vehicles. 3.5.4. Bottleneck inflation. This type of inflation is known as structural inflation. In this type of inflation, supply falls suddenly and demand remains at the same level. Example, during GST implementation, there was a sudden supply shock as the companies and others couldn't comply with supply norms all of a sudden. Sticky inflation, it means that inflation is taking longer than expected to fall. Essentially, higher food and fuel prices have seeped into the broader economy and made other things costlier. 3.5.5. Base effect. Base effect is the effect of choosing different reference points while comparing two data that may give different results in terms of absolute change and percentage change. When the inflation rates were too low in the corresponding period of the previous year, even a smaller rise in the price index would arithmetically give a high rate of inflation now. Example, the price index of January 2021 is 110, and that of January 2022 is 120. Now inflation for January 2022 equals open parenthesis 120 minus 110 close parenthesis divided by 110 times 100, which comes out to be 9.09%. Further, suppose that the price index for March 2022 is 180, and that of March 2023 is 190. Now, inflation for March 2023 equals open parenthesis 190 minus 180 close parenthesis divided by 180 times 100, which comes out to be 5.55%. We see that in both the cases the increase in the price index is 10, but the rate of inflation is different. This is due to the base effect. 3.5.6. Inflationary gap and deflationary gap. An inflationary gap is a type of economic gap that exists when the demand for goods and services exceeds production due to factors such as higher levels of overall employment, increased trade activities, or elevated government expenditure. In case of demand pull inflation, aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply of goods and services at full employment. This excess demand represents an inflationary gap. The inflationary gap results in a price rise. Prices will continue to rise till this gap exists. For example, due to the rise in government expenditure, the purchasing power of people increases. This creates excess demand in an economy resulting in an inflationary gap. Deflationary gap is the amount by which actual aggregate demand falls short of aggregate supply at the level of full employment. This may result in a fall in prices due to weak demand and may lead to disinflation or even deflation. 3.5.7. Inflation spiral. It is a situation in an economy that occurs due to wage and price interaction, when wages push prices up and prices pull wages up. This wage-price interaction was seen as a plausible cause of inflation in the year 1935 in the U.S. economy, for the first time. Purchasing power parity. It is a theory of comparing different countries' currencies through a basket of goods approach. Purchasing power parity is used worldwide to compare the income levels in different countries. Let's say that a pair of shoes costs 2,500 rupees in India. Then it should cost $50 in America when the exchange rate is 50 between the dollar and the rupee. However, in reality, there is a divergence in the price in India and America. This is primarily due to difference in the purchasing power of two currencies. 3.5.8. Phillips curve. The Phillips curve is a graph that establishes an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment in an economy. Higher inflation is associated with lower unemployment and vice versa. This is because with economic growth comes inflation, which in turn should lead to more jobs and less unemployment. Inflation short-run Phillips curve unemployment rate figure 3.10, short-term Phillips curve. But in the long run, there is no ultimate relationship between inflation and unemployment. This is because sustained inflation can lead to stagnation, which will cause loss of jobs. So, boosting inflation just for a short-term period to provide relief of employment may not be sustainable in the long run. That is the exact reason why we need an independent central bank for long-term inflation targeting measures, as the government would like to always increase spending to be in the good books of people. Long run Phillips curve initial short, run Phillips curve unemployment rate new short, run Phillips curve BCA figure 3.11. In the long run, unemployment rate remains the same, but with residual inflation, point A to C, 3.6. Measures to contain inflation. Policy for controlling demand push inflation. Aggregate demand in the economy has to be reduced. Government takes various steps like going for fiscal consolidation, contractionary fiscal policy, e.g., increase in personal income tax. On monetary front, RBI adopts dear money, like increasing repo rate, increasing CRR and SLR, or selling government security through open market operation. On foreign trade front, sudden exports of items may be curbed by imposing minimum export price. For controlling cost pull inflation, aggregate supply has to be augmented and cost of production has to be brought down. Government takes various measures like providing subsidies, providing for maximum price at which a product can be sold, improving supply side factors such as dismantling APMCs, fertilizer subsidy reform, etc. 3.7. Business cycle. Business cycle is the fluctuations in economic activity that an economy experiences over a period of time. Business cycles are generally measured using the rise and fall in the real gross domestic product, GDP, or the GDP adjusted for inflation. It is also known as the economic cycle or trade cycle. Boom number of years, OYX trough recovery prosperity recession depression level of business activity figure 3.12, a depiction of a business cycle. A business cycle goes through various phases: recession, depression, recovery, and boom. Recession is a slowdown or contraction in economic activities. It is when the GDP growth rate of a country is negative for 2 consecutive quarters or more. Example, 2008 global recession. Depression is an extreme fall in economic activity that lasts for years, rather than just several quarters. For example, the Great Depression, starting from 1929, lasted roughly a decade. Recovery is the phase in which the economy begins to recover from the negative growth rate. The demand starts to pick up due to low prices. Finally, boom is a phase of strong upward fluctuation in economic activities. 3.7.1. Double dip recession output, GDP, business cycle peak brief recovery average GDP. Recession 1 recession 2 time figure 3.13. Double dip recessions are also known as W-shaped recoveries. Double dip recession is an economic scenario in which a recession is followed by a brief recovery, then another recession. Example, in 1980, in the US, mainly due to a spike in oil prices after the Iranian Revolution. 3.7.2. Policies of cyclical and countercyclical nature. Cyclicality of fiscal policy refers to a change in the direction of government expenditure and taxes based on economic conditions. If the government follows expansionary fiscal, increase spending, plus reduce tax policy during expansion phase in the economy, and contractionary fiscal policy, decrease spending plus increase tax during recession phase, then it is called procyclical fiscal policy. This amplifies the business cycle as it deepens recession and boosts expansion. On the other hand, if the government follows expansionary fiscal, increase spending plus reduce tax policy during recession phase in the economy, and contractionary fiscal policy, decrease spending plus increase tax during expansion phase, then it is called a countercyclical fiscal policy. This dampens the business cycle as it softens recession and moderates expansion. Business cycle without policy, business cycle with countercyclical policy, business cycle with procyclical policy. Y asterisk time figure 3.14. Cyclical and counter cyclical policy.